starting? Perfect. All right, well, today we're going to be in Mark chapter 6, and we're continuing in our Simply Jesus series. And this will be our last Sunday in the Simply Jesus series for the year, because next week, I don't know if you know this, it is December. And so we're going to be doing a Christmas series entitled The Gifts of Christmas. And I encourage you to make it out to as many of those as you can, because they're going to be exciting for us to go over. If you've been following along with us in Mark chapter 6, you may see that today's sermon, the way we've been doing it, because we've been going each section by section, would be on the beheading of John the Baptist. I'm not going to talk about that today. Not that I'm scared to, it's just that I thought, why talk about the beheading of John the Baptist the Sunday before Thanksgiving? So what we're going to do is we're going to skip over that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to explain to you right now, because the way that passage is written is basically as a side note to explain some points. And so for you today, I tell you, as I'm preaching other things, as I'm preaching through the book of Mark, what you're going to hear is me tie back to that moment so that we can bring that part to light, just as the author Mark wrote it in the passage there. And so today what we're doing is we're telling a story that many people know. You don't have to be in church to have heard of this story before. And in fact, this story occurs in all four Gospels. It's a miracle that took place that sometimes people try to rationalize, but when you rationalize it, you're not reading it for what it was written, and you're not understanding the reality of what took place in a moment. You have to, when we read stories that we've heard over and over and over again, we have to do something called choose all, right? And I talk about this a lot of times, how we have moments where we have favorite movies or books. How many of you have a favorite movie or book that you could just watch over and over and over, or read over, and every time you read it or watch it, you just go, man, that's amazing, right? Like you're so thankful, and you read it choosing awe. You choose to be excited. You choose to be amazed at what you are experiencing. And today's story, you have to do that same thing. Because when we read about Jesus feeding the 5,000, some of us have spoken this, have heard this time and time again, that we almost put it in the back of our minds like a story we tell our children, but we don't necessarily believe applies to us. Am I accurate in saying this? Right. Because we've all heard the story. We all know the story. I shouldn't say all, but most of us know the story. And so when we get to this place, we say, yeah. But when we do that, we miss the miracle. We miss the application for our lives. And so when we get to the beginning of our passage today, we're in Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 30. We're picking up where we left off last week. Last week, Jesus sends out the disciples to take the message of Jesus to the people, to take the authority to cast out demons and to bring healing. And this is where Jesus sends them. And they're all returning back to Jesus now. And they're returning as apostles. So they were disciples before because they were learning from Jesus, but now they have been sent to take a message, and so now they are apostles. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because an apostle means a sent one. So, picking up in Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 30, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then Jesus, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. How many of you would love to go to a solitary place right now? You are exhausted, you've been working hard, and you're just like, I just need to rest. I just need to rest. I need to get away from people. You know, when my wife and I went on our honeymoon, I'm not going into weird details. When we went on our honeymoon, we said, I don't want to go where people are. We both worked in the service industry with people. I worked with kids. I served in the church. I said, I don't want to go in season anywhere. I want to go where people aren't. So we went to a ski resort in New York in the middle of the summer. And you know what? We had fun. We went mini golf and we did all these other things. And it was nice because I didn't have to deal with people. I went to a solitary place. Right? And so we laugh, but we're all like, that sounds pretty good. I'm sick and tired of people. And this is what Jesus recognized. His disciples are coming back. They're high-fiving. They're telling stories. You won't believe what happened. We had this demon manifest and we cast it out. You won't believe what happened. This man couldn't walk and we healed him in your name, Jesus. And they're telling all these stories, and they're probably shedding tears of these towns probably that rejected them. And Jesus, in this moment, he goes, I recognize that my disciples are tired. They're tired. And there's one thing that Jesus understands, is that when you're tired, you don't normally operate that well. Can I get an amen? Amen? Only time I've ever left my child in the car. And if you dare judge me, I recognized it within 3 minutes. But the only time I ever did was when I was exhausted. And I wasn't thinking straight. When am I most likely to possibly get in an accident? When I'm tired and I'm not thinking straight. When am I most likely to forget something? When I'm tired and I'm not thinking straight. And so we think we can go on and on and on, and we can push, but the reality is, at some point, when push comes to shove, you're going to forget, you're going to mess up because you're too tired and you didn't take the time to rest. And one of the things we have to understand is that rest is good. Amen. It's my first point of the day. Rest is good. Why is the Sabbath there? The Sabbath is there because rest is good. It's important to stop, to relax, because if you don't, you're not going to make it in life. You're just not. And so Jesus, recognizing the exhaustion by his disciples, he says, hey, let's get away. Let's go to a solitary place and rest. I don't know if you know this, but the worst time to come talk with me about something very important is right after I preach on a Sunday morning. You can come talk with me. I love talking with people after I preach, but don't come up to me a Sunday after I preach and try to bring something that I have to recall later, because I'm not going to remember it. Like, if you want me to remember something that you tell me on a Sunday morning, text me, email me, say, hey, Pastor, I'm going to call you this week. But and the reason why is because when you're coming down off of that high from preaching, you are exhausted. There was one time I literally thought I was going to have to go to the hospital after ministering. Because literally I showed up, I practiced for worship. I started practice at 5 p.m. We practiced till around 5:50. Worship started at 6. This was a Hispanic church, so you're going to understand what I'm saying here. So worship went till around 6:45 or so. And so then at 6:45 I played for off 6:52 or so. I stepped off the platform. I sat in my seat for 5 minutes. And then the guest speaker said, hey, Mr. Piano Player, can you come up here and play while I speak? Sure. Now, there's no place to sit because this is a standing keyboard. So now I go up and I'm playing while he speaks, and he speaks for an hour. So then we go into an altar call. So then there's like a 30, 35-minute altar call. So if we're talking like 3 hours here where I'm just going nonstop in ministry, essentially, and literally I end and I just literally not collapsed like I fell over, but I just sat down and I just laid on the floor. Just on the platform, I just laid there for like 25 minutes. It's exhausting because you pour your passion and your soul into everything you do. And so we have to understand that rest is good. Rest is important. Take time to yourself. I posted this week about how much I value, Teresa, you said it too, the single parent, the stay-at-home parent, these people who don't get time away from their children, or they go to work and all they have is their children because they don't have that support system at home. Listen, I watched my kids by myself on Thursday, and I watched them by myself. My wife will testify to that. Thursday I came in and I said, I'm going to do everything my wife does. So normally, we laugh, but this is going to sound different because I'm going to tell you the reality here. So normally when my wife is away and I'm watching the kids, I do the laundry, I do the dishes. Like I watch the kids and make sure they're fed, all those kinds of things. But I said, today I'm going to do what my wife does. So I'm going to homeschool, I'm going to feed, I'm going to play, I'm going to make sure my children know I love them. Right? Because what I'm saying here are two very different things. Working, it's really hard for me to continually pour into my children like that. And listen, if you don't know me that well, I love my kids. Like, if you spend time with me, I love my kids. But I'll tell you right now, when it hit like 5 o'clock, I put dinner on the table and I went in the dark stairwell and I sat there. And I called my wife and I said, when are you going to be home, dear? I can't do it anymore. I'm done. I need a solitary place. She said, I still have another hour. I'm like, fine, whatever. And of course, Zoe then finds me, my 20-month-old daughter. She just comes, Dad. 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 I'm like, I love you. Please go away. And so shout out to the single parents and the stay-at-home parents, because the reality is when we're constantly serving people, you need your rest. You need your time away. And so Jesus recognized this need in his disciples and he said, let's go away. And so a lot of them are fishermen, so they know the area. They hop on a boat and they say, we know where to go. We know this solitary harbor. It's away from all these towns. And so they get on the boat and they start going. But here's the problem, is that before everybody knew Jesus, they knew his face, they knew his name. Now the disciples had been sent out and they had been performing miracles. So now there's not one person that people are looking for, there's 13 people. And so when we get to verse 33, it says this, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, so he began teaching them many things. Imagine hopping in a boat because you want to get rest, right? So I'll just act like this line here is the coast. And the disciples hop on the boat and they go out to sea, but the reality is there's people on the shore. Nate, can you stand up right here and just, perfect, and just stare at me this whole time? All right, just don't stay on the shore though. All right, now I'm going out. Now just walk with me. Now I'm trying to get away from this person. I need my rest. But all I'm doing as I'm going around is I'm just seeing this crowd of people following me everywhere I go. Right? Thank you, Nate. You're good to sit down. And this is what it's like as a mom, and this is what it's like as a dad when your kids need you, right? They just... And this is what the people are doing. They're just following the boat along the shore. And as people are walking, they're just saying, hey, Jesus and the disciples are on this boat. Come with me. You got to see what they're going to do. And so literally, they're not seeing just one. They're seeing the mass grow as the boat travels farther and farther. And when it gets to this amazing point, it says this. Verse 33. They ran on foot from all the time ahead of them. They got there ahead of them. They're on foot, they're running, they see the boat coming to shore, and they're just waiting. This is like the puppy dog sitting at the door when you get home. They're just like, let me love you. Let me love you. And Jesus looks at them and he knows his disciples need rest, but what he also does is he has some compassion on the need of these people. And he says, you know what, disciples, I got this. You just stay in the back and I'll handle this. So Jesus begins to teach them things about the kingdom. He teaches them about what it means to be saved and following God. And there's so many different things taking place here. But one of the things we have to understand is that this crowd of people that was gathering and running after Jesus, they didn't pack food. All they were doing was just running after Jesus. And there's a lesson in this, right? There's a lesson in this, that they said, I'm not bringing anything other than the people that I see, because I'm going to bring as many possible people as I can, so that when we get to Jesus, I know as many people are going to see him for who he is. There was no time to make and pack a lunch. There was no time to gather your things. It was just, I see Jesus, I'm running after Jesus. Some of us should take a lesson and a note in that. Some of us want to be so prepared through. But I'm telling you right now, your first and greatest thought should always be, I'm running after Jesus. Amen. It should be, I'm running after Jesus. So anyway, we're moving forward in our story here. And so it's getting later in the day. In verse 35, it says, by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Remember, they know it's a remote place. They brought them there. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. You ever been so tired that you start to ask yourself when people are over, what do I need to say to get these people out of my house? My wife and I are not shy about the fact that we are not night owls. Like our kids wake up early, so we go to bed early because I don't know if you know this about children, they don't care what time you want to wake up. So we go to bed earlier. And when people come over in the evening, one of the things that we recognize and experience in our life is that, if somebody comes over and it starts to get late, we're not shy anymore. Or just be like, look, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. Like, you got to go home or you got to learn how to lock up because we're not doing this anymore. One of us, my wife, Julie, she is known to be like, hey, I'm tired, good night. And she'll just leave. Like, she'll just go off and she'll go to bed and leave me to deal with all of the situation. Why? Because when you get to a certain point of being tired, you're just like, can you all just go away? And the disciples here, this is what they're coming to Jesus. And he's like, hey, listen, Jesus, these people are hungry. Like, there's no food here. So why don't we just send them to go get food? And we'll use this as a time to get people away. I mean, this is a very subtle and also kind and real situation. These people do need to eat. It's getting later. I mean, we're talking about dinner time now. And the people are saying, Jesus is like, hey, the disciples, Jesus, hey, we came here to rest. These people need food. This is a 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing. Get them out of here. We can get our rest. They can get food. But Jesus has compassion on these people. He sees them as a sheep without a shepherd. He sees them as people who need to be taken care of. And so he in this moment, he wants to show compassion to the crowd, and he wants to teach his disciples a lesson. And so this is where we get to the miracle of the story. Jesus looks at his disciples and their plea to get the people out of there, and he says, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? You got to love Jesus here because he surely knew their response. He already knew they was tired. We covered that because he said, hey, let's go to a solitary place. He knows his disciples are most likely going to respond this way. One, he's Jesus, but also he's common sense. And what the disciples had just said, you have to remember, is that they're in a remote place. They are tired, they are exhausted, and Jesus is saying, you give them something to eat. And all they're probably hearing is, I don't want to go that far. Like, I don't want to walk and pick up baskets and baskets of food for all of these people to be able to eat. After all, they're going to be feeding thousands and thousands of people. And so what they're telling Jesus is, hey, I don't want to walk that far. I don't want to carry all that food. I'm going to have to take multiple trips most likely, and I don't want to do that. I mean, and if you look at this, they say that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? They're not saying we don't have the money. They don't say that. They're saying, are we to go and spend that much on bread? Basically, the disciples have the resources available. They don't necessarily have the energy, most likely. And so Jesus looks at his disciples. He knows they're tired and he has compassion on them. But he also looks at this massive crowd and he has compassion on them. And in a moment, Jesus is able to mold things together which are going to change history. So Jesus looks at them, understanding that they're tired, understanding the situation. He says, all right, look, how many loaves do you have? He asked. And he says, go and see. So, they're looking around and they finally find this little boy who has lunch. His mom packed him lunch. Everybody else had come and they hadn't grabbed food, but this boy, I'm sure his mama loved him. She packed him food just in case. And they find out, and it says they have 5 loaves and there's 2 fish as well. So Jesus directs the people, hey, sit down in groups in the green grass. Sit down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Now, everybody likes to make jokes about me and how organized I like to be and how much I love numbers. But, here Jesus says, hey, sit down in a specific number. Sit down in hundreds and 50s. Basically what he's saying is get organized because I'm about to do something incredible. And the reality is a lot of times we want Jesus just to show up and do something, but normally what happens is Jesus says, hey, if you want me to do something incredible, I want you to get organized first. I want you to be prepared for what I'm about to do. And when I look at our church even and everything that's been taking place, what has been taking place? We have been preparing for a move of God. Preparing for God to do something incredible. We've been getting organized. We've been putting leaders in the right places. We've been getting our ministries to a healthier place. So he says, hey, get organized. And we have to remember this right here because it's going to be extremely important at the end of the passage. So then Jesus, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looks up to heaven. He gives thanks. He breaks the loaves, and he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. Now, I don't know about you, but I in my mind, there are times where I try to rationalize a miracle. And one of the things that people try to do is they go, there's got to be a way to explain this. But if you can explain it, it's not a miracle. You're explaining it. That's not what a miracle is. And so when we look at this story, we can't take away the miracle. One of the ways that people have tried to rationalize this story is they go, well, they had the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and people were overwhelmed by the generosity of this young man, and people were so overwhelmed that they started pulling out their lunches, and they were sharing with everybody. But 1, that's not what happened. And 2, that's not what the scriptures actually say. Because when you're translating them, and it says that he gave thanks and broke the loaves, this is a continuous action. It's not saying Jesus broke the loaves one time. What it's saying is Jesus began breaking the loaves and breaking the loaves. And what's happening is essentially Jesus is breaking loaves after giving thanks over and over again. And he's handing them to the disciples. And the disciples are essentially now servers serving multiple banquet tables of groups of hundreds and 50s. And so Jesus is there and he just keeps breaking the bread and the fish and separating and all this stuff. And what's taking place is a miracle that is multiplying in the moment. In the moment. And so what ends up happening is that like Jesus takes a loaf of bread and he splits it. But what ends up happening is now we have these 2 pieces of bread, but what's amazing is in Jesus' hands, these 2 pieces of bread now look like this. They're now 2 whole pieces of bread. And then Jesus breaks it again. But the reality is this doesn't just end here, it's another 2 pieces. It's another 2 whole pieces, and that every time Jesus is breaking, more and more keeps happening. You see, like I said, I try to rationalize, and so I used to think, they probably carried the baskets up here, and people would reach in, and the bread would multiply in the basket. But that's not what the scriptures say. The scripture says that the miracle took place in Jesus' hands. The miracle didn't take place in the disciples' distribution. The miracle didn't take place in the stomachs of the people. Well, maybe for some. But the miracle took place in the hands of Jesus. And when we look at this, I just can't help but think about all of the things that I try to do on my own, hoping that Jesus is going to bless it. I think that, or other people, let's go this way. God, I want you to take my bitterness away from me, but the reality is I'm not going to give you my bitterness. I'm not going to speak it over to you. I'm not going to hand it over to you. I just want you to change me, but I'm not actually going to place anything in your hands. What we're saying is, Jesus, I want you to perform a miracle in my hands. And Jesus looks at us and says, no, that's not how this works. It takes place in mine. So if you're sick, what do? We give it to Jesus. If we're in a broken relationship, what do? We give it to Jesus. If we have a financial bind and we don't know how we're going to be provided for, what do? We give it to Jesus. Yeah, we do our part in regards to the things that we can do, and we seek doctors, we make sure we have a job if we can wear all these different things. But what we do is we say, Jesus, I give this to you, and continually seek him and ask him to perform a miracle. So what's amazing is we see that all of these people begin to be fed, and they end up full, satisfied, because of the miracle that took place in the hands of Jesus. And the disciples, verse 43 and 44, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Now, we got to go back to what I had said before. What did Jesus tell them to do? Sit down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Now, when you first read this, you go, man, this is old school. How in the world did they count 5,000 people? Well, the reality is they wouldn't have to, because they were already organized in specific groups of people. The way that they ate in their culture is that men ate with men and women ate with women and children. And so, I don't know about you, but with my kids, it's very hard to count my kids when we're trying to sit down and do things, because they always want to get up and moving. And so the disciples aren't going to try to count the group, probably blending and all over the place anyway. But men want to look good and they want to appear good in front of other people. So all they have to do is count what? 50 groups of 100. Which I can count to 50. That's not hard. This is amazing how because Jesus had them get organized, we're able to see the enormosity, I don't even know if that's the word, it doesn't matter, of this miracle. But all they did was count the men. They did not count the women and children. So all in all, Jesus fed probably between 10 and 20,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish because of the miracle that took place in his hands. But we have to go back to disciples too, because there's another point here people sometimes they like to play the ironic card of the disciples, which I do. I mean, the disciples there were 12 basketfuls of food left over. And so they have these 12 basketfuls of food. Each disciple is carrying a basket. And we go, that's hilarious. They didn't have faith that Jesus could feed them, and now they have to carry the basket. But what's also amazing about it is this. Each disciple is carrying an extra blessing of food. They each are carrying more than they would have eaten themselves after they had taken care of others. You see, the disciples were tired. They didn't want to, they were exhausted. They wanted a solitary place. And Jesus said, look, I know you're tired, but I need you to recognize that these people are in need right now. So I'm going to do the miracle. I just need you to serve. I just need you to serve. Just continue coming back and forth to me. Come to me, go out. Come to me, go out. Man, that's a sermon right there, right? Continually come to me, get your food, I'll give you more, you go back out and take it to other people. And then once everybody has been fed, what takes place is the disciples each have a basket full of food left over for themselves. Amazing. Amazing. When we look at this story, we can't just make it a fairy tale. This actually happened. And the application for our lives is great. What do you need to hand over to Jesus? What can he multiply? What can he heal? What can he do in his hands, not your own? Jesus can take your little and he can bless many with it. But the miracle happens in his hands, not your own. Let's pray. God, I'm so thankful for your word. God, I'm so thankful for the encouragement that comes from it and from this miracle. God, that in your hands, amazing things happen. Miracles take place. And so, Jesus, today I pray that we as a church would hand things over to you, believing that you will do what only you can do. God, that you will multiply this congregation as we hand it over to you. God, that you would bring healing to bodies as we hand illnesses over to you. God, that you would restore relationships as we hand our brokenness over to you. God, I pray today that the person who is in desperate need of a touch from you, God, would reach out. God would submit to you and would say, I've tried enough. It's time I give it to you, Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen.